Hi, everybody. So my name is Aron Nels Steinke, and I am a cartoonist. I made the books Mr. Wolf's Class, and we're here as part of VanCAF, having a conversation. I'm here as part of VanCAF, having a conversation with Breena Bard, the cartoonist. And Breena, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. I just realized I don't have my book. Should I have my book to show?
I have your book.
Oh, there it is. Okay. I'm Breena Bard, and I'm a cartoonist as well, living in Portland, Oregon. And that's my book, Trespassers. It comes out in May, although I guess at the time this airs, it will have come out. Yeah, and it's a middle grade mystery graphic novel on Scholastic
Yeah,
Graphics.
we both have the same publisher, Scholastic's Graphics Imprint. Yeah, so your book comes out on May 5th. I'm so excited for it. I just read it. I thought it was amazing. Now I know it's kind of been on a journey. Can you tell us kind of like how your book how did your book get here? Like what was the process?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll work backward. My book is coming out as a result of a contest, which you clued me in on, which is awesome. It was the Get Published by Graphics contest from I think 2017, and I was right on the edge of not quitting, but I was ready to back burner it for a while because I'd been working on it for a number of years, and yeah, so I applied to this contest or submitted, and to my surprise and delight, they chose it as one of the winners, one of two winners. When it comes out, it will have been 8 years since I started working on it, which is crazy. In that time, I got married, I had two kids, I moved across the city, and it was just here and there as I was able to, because I didn't have a publisher all of that time, so it was kind of more of a hobby. And then once I did sign with graphics, a lot of it ended up being redone anyway. So I think I would say working on the book that ended up becoming a book was probably just the last 3 years or so.
I think anybody who had seen what you had been working on had been so impressed and were so excited to see this book uh,
Thank you.
find a home and eventually come out. And now it's going to come out on
I know.
just I guess yeah, just came out on May 5th. So check your favorite comics or book retailer.
That's right.
I know it's a challenging time to have something come out at this point, but it seems like most publishers are just sticking to schedule, and it sounds like a lot of bookstores, you could just call them up and see if they have it, and if they don't, I'm sure they're more than willing to order it for you. Sometimes bookstores will have curbside pickup, or will even maybe deliver it if you're in the neighborhood. Um, so I'm so excited for this book to come out for kids to read. I felt like I couldn't put it down. The main character, uh, like you have a main character named Gabby. So Gabby is uh, going on vacation. Well, she's on vacation at a lakeside cabin or lakeside house with her family, and for the summer. Um, and it kind of centers around her and this mystery and the book that she's writing. She's writing a story about kind of a mystery lake house that is abandoned, and she's imagining what could have happened to the previous inhabitants. A famous architect on the rise to celebrity, and a supermodel or a model wife or partner.
Hmm.
And so, how much of the story is autobiographical? I guess, like, how much of your own life did you put into the story?
Yeah. I mean, the spirit is very drawn from my experience. Like we spent a lot of summers at various lakes and cottages, and I would say the family is based on my family. Um, the idea of the specific mystery that they're writing is all invented, but definitely I've had that experience as a kid where you see a setting or a person and your gears just start turning, like what is going on with them, and you're trying to figure out. Um, the hidden story there. And maybe not everyone's like that. Maybe that is just what a young writer is like. But that was kind of, Gabby is definitely based on childhood me, I would say, and also the tendency to want to play it safe and follow the rules and not get into trouble. And yeah, so the story started for me based on a true event, which was we were at the lake, and one night the neighbor kids came over, and we were kind of not forced, but we were strongly encouraged to go play with them, my brother and I. And my brother and I were just good kids, and these neighbor kids were hooligans. I mean, they were just rough around the edges, cursing. I think one of them smoked a cigarette. It was very like shocking to us, and I felt the whole time very anxious, like these are not the type of people I normally see, and I don't know how to, like, I just didn't know what to do. And I remember as a kid thinking, like, okay, we did our time, we hung out with them, I hope we never see them again. And in real life we didn't. And so the jumping off point for fiction was more of this, like, well, what if you did have to spend the entire week with these kids, and what kind of not just what kind of trouble would you get into, but what's the dynamic between these two kids from very different backgrounds. And yeah, so I think for me the main story I'm trying to tell is just the relational journey that Gabby has as she experiences someone very different than her, and yeah, just kind of pushes outside of her comfort zone and gives someone different a chance, and finds out they're maybe not so different. And then the mystery, of course, is just the fun catalyst for them to get out and spend time together and, yeah, be creative.
Like, I don't know if you're able to process it this way, but like, what are you happiest with this book?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the thing I'm proudest of is just that it is finished and that it will be out in the world. I think since it was such a long journey, and it went through very, numerous different stages of life with me, I think there were so many times when I felt like just quitting and moving on to something new and exciting. And something about this story, maybe because it was so personal to my childhood, every time I picked it back up, I felt like a connection with it. And that really, like, and every time it surprised me, like, I should be, because most of the time, it doesn't take much to kind of lure you away to a new project, something exciting and new. And yeah, I think it was just a little bit of a stubborn streak, but also, like, I think that I just believed in the story. And so I was just really proud. I mean, I think I would have finished it someday regardless, but to have an outlet that, like Scholastic, that is going to put it out on a large scale, that was like, that just sealed the deal for me. Like, you have to finish this. And yeah, so I feel proud that it's a book.
Talking about your growing up in Wisconsin, and this book is it's very obvious to me when a book takes place somewhere other than I'm used to narratives taking place. And for some reason, I feel like the Midwest gets short shrift in a way where I can think of a handful of stories that take place in the Midwest. Is that something that you did consciously, or are there, like, did you feel that was important to have it take place in the Midwest? I guess that kind of like lake culture too is a thing that I think of being Midwest, upper East Coast kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, the setting just seemed natural to me, since it was based on my, that is where I spent my childhood, growing up in Wisconsin. But I do think, I think I could have told the story any number of places. It sticks with readers, and I don't think that readers who didn't grow up in the Midwest won't enjoy the story. But there is something special about having your home area depicted like that.
I feel like, the same thing with the books that I'm making right now with the Mr. Wolf's class books, is that, like, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and, the love for trees and outdoors is really important to me. And so I try to put that in my books.
Mhm.
Whenever I watch TV shows or movies that are supposed to take place somewhere specific, and then you can see the eucalyptus trees in the background,
Right.
like, no, that's California. Like, stop trying to
Yeah.
somewhere else. So what is your writing process like? Being a cartoonist, we're charged with not just writing, we're also
Mhm.
creating the illustrations, and as well as you being I assume full-time parent of two
Mhm.
kids.
Mhm.
How has that changed over time, and how do you approach actually doing the work?
I think what's changed is I used to think to be a writer, you just sat down and wrote, which of course there's some amount of that, just sitting down and doing the work. There's a lot of that, but I think the part that is really fitting well with my life as a full-time parent right now is I'm realizing how much of my writing, especially early on, how much of the writing process is thinking and just like churning ideas over and over in your head and like, you know, there's something to the whole shower idea, where you're in the shower and you have your brilliant idea and you're not trying to think about something and things pop up. And I think the longer that you've been a writer, you have different discarded ideas or discarded characters that'll suddenly jump back in and want to be a part of a new story. And I'm actually, that's what I'm in right now, that phase, thinking of what'll be my next book. And I've had a lot, like I've once I realized that it was a lot of like it just brought me this kind of peace because I don't have time to sit down and write the way I think I need to. So just treating like every moment basically as writing, even if you're not putting anything down on paper. Um,
I find it hard to remember things that are good. So how
mhm.
are you, like, are you just able to remember it all, or do you actually take notes when you have the kind of epiphany
I
moment?
mean, I don't have like a fully formed novel in my brain and then it all comes out, but I think yeah, taking time to write down notes or if it's a really good idea, I feel like it does stick around, unless it's something really complicated or really like if it's dreamlike and you might lose it if you don't get it down. Um, there's definitely a lot of note taking as well, but as far as I don't know. And then, well, then when I do sit down to write, I feel like things are just fresher at the top of my mind. And I'm not sitting there writing, thinking, like, okay, now what are they going to do here? Like, I just know because I've spent so much time thinking about it.
Is there anything you can say about what your next project might be?
Well, there's a potential Trespassers sequel in the works, which would just be kind of following Paige and Gabby into another adventure. And I won't say too much more about that one. Um, and yeah, I think what another thing which has surprised me is that I've kind of, I've definitely been drawn when I think about the content that I like to consume. There is a lot of times a mystery element or just suspense or there's something mysterious that's kind of pulling you into it. And I never considered myself a mystery writer, but I do think there'll be some element of that to whatever. So I'm working on another potential book or series idea that would be um, another mystery adjacent type story. That's super super amazing.
Cool.
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm not being withholding. I really don't have that good of a grasp on it yet because I'm making sense of it to myself also.
Breena, you started out um, self-publishing, and you and I think, connected early on when you were applying for a Xeric grant,
Mhm.
and which you then you got for your book Picket Line. And when I saw that book, it was like impressive to me how big it was, first of all, and how much work it was, and how good it was. Now that you are, you've doubled down even more so, and
Mhm.
this book is so great, so good. What did you learn about publishing through working with an editor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an essential part of writing good work. I didn't have an editor for my self-published works. I mean, I sent an early draft to a bunch of friends, and they, like for Picket Line, they gave me their feedback, and I made some changes, and maybe some people gave like really specific editorial feedback, but at the end of the day, when you're self-publishing, like you're the final say. You get to make all the creative and editorial calls, and for better or worse, that you're it. So um, to suddenly, well, not so suddenly, but to then move to working with an editor who, I will say, like, I still felt, even though I had someone, giving me different, at different points along the way, different layers of feedback, um, it still felt like my book. I mean, it still very much felt like it was my work, and I got to, the book that I put out doesn't feel like, oh, and then someone else got their hands in and made a ton of changes just to make it palatable or marketable. I think what happened was, first of all, the first pass, my editor came in and was just like, first of all, said a lot of really nice things, which feels good. Like, lead with the praise, and then, but then, gave some really important feedback, which was along the lines of like, well, the character, your main character needs to have more of an emotional journey, they have to change more by the end of the book, which is a huge, it's very important. He was right, and fortunately, it wasn't like we were able to kind of work that in here and there with different like small bits of conversation without like rewriting the whole book, because I think the bulk of it was there. There were definitely times when you feel defensive and you want to, and there were times when I said, no, I think that they would say it this way, and then that stayed in. But I do think it's a far better book for having had somebody come in and really get to put a new set of eyes on it, like a skillful set of eyes that knows what works and what doesn't and what it's missing. But it's it's a big jump from being the only person that has to make those choices. So it was an adjustment, but a welcome one. Yeah, I just remembered the biggest edit to my book early on was I had a narrator throughout, and my editor like very cautiously suggested, like, I don't think you need a narrator, which meant a lot of, I had to rewrite the entire first 20 pages of the book because the narrator was setting everything up. So anyway, that just occurred to me, like, there's some big changes that come, but I don't know if this is always true, but I feel like for my book, it really was like every change was for the better. So yeah.
Thank you for chatting with me, Breena. And again, everybody, Trespassers by Breena Bard. What ages would you say this is for?
8 to 12. All right, let's talk about you for a change. Okay.
I'm a total narcissist, so.
Okay, so just getting started.
Yeah.
No, well, we are huge Mr. Wolf's Class fans in this house. My husband and I have been reading your comics since before they were a middle grade series, when it was just Mr. Wolf. And I'm curious, like, what was the process for you to take something that was a more or less autobiographical, like journal comic, and turning that into a series for kids? What was the impetus for that, or how did that work? How did that come about?
Well, so, I had made a few books for publishers before, and then I became a teacher. And this was 10 years ago when I became a teacher. I found myself with less and less time, and then we had a child. And I was really stuck in a style of drawing that was really labor intensive, and it didn't have to be. I would use repeatographs, and I would carve my lines over and over again in a way that was like a dead line, but it was, I really worked the line over and over again. I had been looking at a lot of comics that were, fluid and were about gestures and about making one line, and instead of going over your line over and over again to make it a deadline. And so I forced myself to draw in a freed up style because, first of all, I had less time, and I also decided that this would be a throwaway project. Mr. Wolf would be just this thing I would do to try something new.
Mm-hmm.
And so, being a teacher and coming from autobiographical comics, I wanted to keep doing autobiography, but I didn't want to reveal the identities of my students, and I also wanted to kind of push myself out of the frame, even though it was ultimately framed around me and my experience as a teacher. I felt like making myself a wolf was better. At least, I guess any teacher could feel like that was them.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have to see Mr. Wolf as, what I look like. It was easier for me to free it up and do that. So how did it become a graphic novel? Well, I felt like it was received well by, adults, and ultimately, like, my students were really excited by it.
Mm-hmm.
I would take the comic strips and I would Xerox copies for them without the words, and then I would have them fill in what they thought was happening. And they loved doing that, and they loved reading the comics. And then I decided, I should probably try to make this into something bigger. And that took, several years. And, the first draft of Mr. Wolf's Class that I wrote was awful. I was trying to tell some kind of plot-driven, like mystery, and it just didn't work. It was so forced and labored. I don't know if I'm that kind of storyteller, or at least it just felt it didn't capture what I was good at doing, and what I was good at doing was representing the quirkiness of a classroom. And so yeah, luckily I got Scholastic and Graphics to be interested in publishing it, and just finished the third one's out. So the first one, it's just called Mr. Wolf's Class. Technically, there's a title, so like a volume title for it. It's called The First Day of School. But it doesn't appear printed anywhere. And then the second one's Mystery Club. The third one's Lucky Stars. And then Field Trip comes out in October.
Okay. And will that be the final book in the series?
It's the last one that I have written so far.
Okay.
I'd like to do more.
Once the kids are pounding on your door demanding it, they're gonna have
Yeah, they need to do that. They can send their letters to Scholastic.
Yeah, what I love about this as a series is I don't remember if the Mr. Wolf, if your original comics had, maybe they did. Did they have the recurring student characters?
Yeah,
they weren't as developed. It was like you said, it was more centered on your teaching experience.
There were a few characters that were recurring. Like there was a character named Noah, who was based on one of my students who had, who wore a hoodie every day. Every single day he wore the same hoodie, rain or shine. I don't know if it ever got washed. I had like a couple characters that were reoccurring.
So, well, what I love about it as a series is you know, in the first book, which is wonderful, and I think it works really well as a, like you said, kind of a slice of life, just all of these small moments kind of building throughout this one day. And you meet all of the characters and you get to know them a little bit, but by the time book 2 comes out, you've done that work. And so each book that comes out now, you just feel more and more connected to the characters, and you kind of know, oh, what would Randy do in this situation? Oh, of course. Like you get to, and the kids start to have their favorites. And yeah, I guess I'm curious, this is off the list, but what amount of character development had you done for each of these characters, and how much have they grown just as you're writing these books? Are they well, you said Noah is based on an actual student. Are the rest also based on students?
And Noah is not a character in the Mr. Wolf's Class series.
Oh, okay.
No, he is. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I feel like yeah.
No, he is.
Okay.
Why did I forget that? So Yeah, he is. You're right. His personality is not so much though.
Mhm.
A lot of the personalities are kind of amalgams of different characters. That's how they started, and then they became their own people. So
Mhm.
I think Randy definitely started as somebody, um, or at least a couple people, and then over time, after I've drawn her and I've put her on paper, and she's come to have a life of her own, and
Mhm.
now she exists on her own, which is really cool. Like this, and it's easy to write for in a way. Like if I were to do a fifth book, it would be really easy because I know the characters. I've already made the world, and I know how they'll react and respond. I just have to put in, the conflict or
Right.
the
See how
problem.
they see what
Yeah.
they do with it. Yeah. Yeah.
So they, there's some minor characters that I'd love to get more front and center.
Mhm.
Um, there's also some design choices. I wish I had spent more time designing some characters
Mm.
because they look a little too similar to another character. But it feels like at this point I can't touch that because they're already established.
Mhm. I do wonder, since these are such familiar characters now, it also seems like perfectly suited to some kind of animation, like whether it was a series or a movie. Do you have any interest in doing something like that?
I do. Now I love comics. I feel like you know I the medium of graphic novels and comics is my medium. But I did go to school for animation. That is my first passion.
Mhm.
So I would love to see Mr. Wolf's Class as a TV show.
Mhm.
That's not. I don't see a movie necessarily. Um, I see these more as episodic and
Mhm.
focused on one character became being the focus of each episode. So you get to know them better and kind of
Yeah.
natural ensemble.
Yeah.
Um, so that would be really cool.
Mhm. For you, what are the different considerations you have if we're between writing for a series and writing a one-off story? And do you have interest in doing any more of, anything that wasn't a series?
That's a good question. I think like I'm trying to do a one-off right now, but I'm realizing, and it sounds like maybe you thought of it too. I don't know. Um,
Mhm.
it would be good to also potentially leave it open for a partner book,
Mhm.
a sequel or something connected to it,
Mhm.
because kids do like reading in succession. They do like reading companion books or sequels. They
Mhm.
like reading the series, and with our medium, with graphic novels, kids will sit down and read the whole book in a day, and it's like, and they'll say, "Where's the next one?" And you're
Right.
like, ah, you know, uh, I love the fact that they read it so fast in a way
Mhm.
because if you think about the library, um, it just the circulation rate is higher. More kids read the book. It's much more accessible, and
Mhm.
more people enjoy it. So instead of it being with someone for a month, if they're able to turn it over and then read it again and again,
Right.
and or pass it along to a cousin or a friend, that's
Mhm.
great. I
Mhm.
want people to enjoy my books. So
I feel like you could do a sequel to just about any one-off if I mean, unless it was like clearly like there's nothing left to this story here, but
yeah.
you know, I
Well,
think that there's ways to pick up because life works that way. Like there's a significant moment in your life and it resolves, and then something else happens.
I mean, I think the idea of a sequel, sometimes people think of it as being, or at least we used to think of it as being, a cheap money making thing. So they did the knockoff. They did, Home Alone 2, and they
Mm-hmm.
did Home Alone 3 or whatever, or they did,
And they got the
um,
new kid for Home
and it
Alone
always,
4.
it
Yeah.
wasn't as good as the original. And then you think about like, one of my heroes was, or is Hayao Miyazaki, and
Mm-hmm.
he never wanted to do a Totoro sequel. He never wanted to do a sequel of any of his movies. And then you look at like Pixar and like they're going to do Toy Story, whatever. Like
Mm-hmm.
and in some ways it feels cheap, but if it's good, then it's not cheap.
Right.
And if in the realm of books, it's there's not a lot of money in books, so we're
Mm-hmm.
not like we're just trying to survive, I
Right.
think. And
you're not selling out by considering a sequel.
no, and I like spending time in that world. I mean, one book is not that long in terms of graphic novels, like in terms of like spending time with the character. So naturally, you want to have more,
Right.
and I want to spend more time with them. And now that we kind of are in the golden age of television, or the second golden age, whatever it is, like my favorite things are series. I like going back to the characters, and I like seeing them not just grow over one book, but seeing them grow throughout a whole season or over 3 seasons. So it's I like spending time in that world. And I don't know what the question was, but yeah, I like
just
series.
just the different considerations between writing for a series versus a one-off, which it does seem like unless you I don't know, it seems like maybe there's not a huge difference, except for maybe for a series you're specifically planning like, well, I know I'm going to be returning to these characters again and again, so I can slowly, or if it was like a trilogy where it was a cliffhanger at the end of each book and you need to have the next books. But I feel like for Mr. Wolf's Class, like any of those books stands alone as well. They're only a series because you're coming back to the same characters in the same school. And
yeah, I mean that's the challenge. It's like we didn't want to put numbers on the spine because we didn't want to limit the readers to have to go in order, and they don't need to go in order. But I understand as a reader, I kind of do want to start with the first one, so I do want to know what number 1 is. But at least it's not limiting. So like I don't like it when I'm reading a series and I can't get number 1 from the library or something. Like that's a bummer. So
yeah.
That's why Raina's got it figured out with her books, because
right.
They work together, but they also work apart, and that you don't have to read them in any order.
So start writing your young Aron memoirs.
Well, that's the hard part, like I don't really have much to say, but I do like memoirs, and I do like being able to find and tap into things that are kind of everyone's got something interesting to say if you find the right thing and say it in the right way. And I think that's why comics are such a good medium. I'll read anything in comics. Like, it doesn't matter what the content is, as long as it's told well. So I'll read a comic about someone drinking coffee and eating and making food or something, if it's done well.
And we read a lot of kids comics though, because I have kids. So like we're 1 book away from finishing the Dogman series for the 1000th time.
Have you read them yourself?
Oh yeah, we've read them all, but because of the quarantine, I was like, let's read them all from book 1 to book 10 or whatever, nonstop, and we have taken breaks, but there too, it's just fun to see how it all builds on itself. And we've read all the Bone comics and the Adventure Time comics, and some of them weren't around. Well, none of those were around when I was a kid, so it is kind of fun it's all new to me. And like you said, if they're done well, it's not boring. It's not like, oh, these are for kids, so I can't enjoy
I mean,
that.
I think I think like Dave Pilkey's voice and the Dogman stuff, it's like it's first of all, it's hilarious, and it just moves at like a breakneck pace where like you just zip through them.
And they're fun to read.
Oh, they're so fun. And if I had those books when I was a kid, I would have been a reader sooner. I wonder too, like if kids are starting to pick up on like the literary references, like are they going to start reading Hemingway?
I know.
Read Lord of the Flies, and like
it's made me at least a few times go to Wikipedia and be like, what does happen in Grapes of Wrath? I forget, like.
Oh yeah.
Or some of those books I haven't read at all, so it's kind of a crash course for me as an adult to go back and brush up on American literature. But right, when they do read Lord of the Flies, in 7th grade or whatever, they'll have like maybe all these moments of like, oh wait, I know that character Piggy and the Specs, and Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think kids comics have really come a long way, and when I started drawing comics for kids, it was that it was at that time when the literary graphic novel was starting to really get like, that comics aren't just for kids kind of thing, and but I was noticing, wait, there's nothing for kids. I don't count superhero stuff because that wasn't designed for kids really. When we talk about like language use, and I know some creators talk about growing up reading the reading superhero comics and developing like a high vocabulary because they were looking up these
adult words.
These adult words, and for me, I was just like, it just sounds like garbage, and I'm just gonna look at the artwork. And I never paid attention to the dialogue. I didn't pay attention to the narrative that was written because it didn't flow for me, and it was just really, it just made the process of getting the story like, it was incomprehensible for me. I didn't want to labor through it.
Yeah.
And as an adult, there's tons of good comics that I'm not aware of, but
Yeah.
Well, do you want to say anything else? I'll probably end this, and we can just chat for a second if you want.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So
I feel like though, make sure when you edit to take more from you and put you up front, because you're,
Yeah. Well, I'll make it good, and you can look at it too. And,
okay.
Okay. So to remind everybody, we've got Breena Bard and her book Trespassers, which is out now by Scholastic's graphics imprint. So look for it. Should be available at your local bookstore. You can order online. Any online plugs you have, Breena?
I mean, you can find me at breenabard.com, and Instagram, I'm Breena Bard Comics, and Twitter is a holdover from my self-publishing days. I'm Easel Ain't Easy, which I think if you just search Breena Bard, it comes up too. So, yeah.
And I'm Aron Nels Steinke. You can go to mrwolfsclass.com, and I'm Aron Nels Steinke on Instagram, and Mr. Wolf Comics on Twitter. Yeah, I wish I had made the same thing, right?
Here's advice to young cartoonists is just be really careful about what you choose for your handles, because they'll follow you forever.
Okay.
Cool.
All right. Thank you, Breena.
Yeah, thank you, Aron. This was fun.
Thank you, VanCAF.
Bye, everyone.